All right, so today we're going to talk about the cognitive orientation to daily occupational performance approach. What is this approach? This approach is also known as co-op, and it attempts to enable human occupation and focuses on the performance of the occupation. It's goal-oriented and focuses on the goals that the client creates, and it's done entirely at the performance level. So there's 4 specific objectives: skill acquisition, strategy use, generalization and transfer of skills, and 7 key features. And these are client-chosen goals, dynamic performance analysis, cognitive strategy use, guided discovery, enabling principles, parent or caregiver involvement, and session structure and format. And there's an ultimate objective, and it is to enable those with activity limitations to acquire necessary skills and strategies to have optimal participation in their everyday activities. History of co-op. It was created in the 1990s, and it was developed to help children who had developmental coordination disorder, which affects motor performance, to perform childhood skills that they were having issues with. So they were looking initially at the underlying deficits and problems that were causing these children to have issues with skills, and they were looking at it from neurodevelopmental and sensory motor perspectives, and this wasn't working, so they needed to find a new perspective, and they decided to use a cognitive-based approach and a learning-based approach, and this was initially called the verbal self-guidance approach. So this used the goal, plan, do, check strategy to help change behaviors. And in the goal, plan, do, check strategy, you first create goals, plan strategies and ways to obtain the goals, and then you follow through with these strategies and then go back and check and reflect to see if it worked. And you can kind of go back through the cycle and the steps as many times as you want until you achieve your goals. And this really enables the client to create their own goals and come up with their own solutions and really notice the problems they're having with performance. Use dynamic performance analysis, which analyzed the performance of an activity and identified performance problems, and allows the therapist and the client to break down the task and the activity into the person, environment, and task, and identify strategies to better their performance. And based on studies, this was shown to be better than the traditional approaches for children with developmental coordination disorder, as well as other populations that included brain injury, Asperger's, cerebral palsy, developmental disabilities, dystonia, pervasive developmental disorder, adults with acute stroke, chronic stroke, and traumatic brain injuries. And this also was good in an individual and group setting. And it was renamed to co-op because of the importance of cognition in the approach. Components to the co-op approach, and these are client-centeredness, performance-based, problem-solving, strategy use, and guided discovery. First, client-centeredness. The client becomes the center of this intervention, and they're also the expert of the occupations they do and the context that they occur in, and you really want to collaborate with the client. So they use the COPM to determine their issues that they're having and to create their goals. So they first identify what occupations are important to them, how they perform them, and if they're satisfied with their performance. And from this, the client can create their own goals that they want to work towards. And by allowing the client to be the center of the intervention and allowing them to create their own goals, it allows them to be more motivated and feel more responsible for the solutions. Performance-based. So with this, you focus on the goal rather than the underlying issues. And this uses a top-down approach, which is the opposite of what they were doing before co-op was created. And it's task-oriented and it focuses directly on performance. And this is really the underlying approach to co-op because it looks at the performance as a whole and the interaction between the person, the task, and environment in producing the performance. And you can also see neuroplastic changes in the brain from training, which is associated with learning and cognition. And this is because this approach is explicit, task-specific, task specific and goal driven, and it allows the client to be active in problem solving, and the tasks are also have real world relevance. So in this process, the client will identify 3 performance goals using the COPM, as previously mentioned, and then from there, the therapist and the client can get a baseline. And the therapist rates performance with the performance quality rating scale, and the client uses the COPM. And the performance quality rating scale was actually designed specifically for co-op, and it's observational and rates performance on a scale from 1 to 10, and it's rated relative to desired, required, or typical performance. And you can also use dynamic performance analysis. So the next component is problem solving, and performance issues are seen as a problem that needs to be solved. So these processes of problem solving occur naturally during learning, and the client can use the goal, plan, do, check strategy, which is a cognitive strategy and a global strategy. And with this, they can reflect and change the plan as needed. So it's kind of a constant system of problem solving, and you use this to structure an approach to solve problems, so the client has structure when working towards their goals. And there are 2 tools that support problem solving, and these are dynamic performance analysis and guided discovery, which I'll explain a little bit later. Strategy use, there's 2 types of cognitive strategies that are used, and these are global strategies, which is what goal, plan, do, check falls under, and it's an executive strategy and a higher order strategy that is used to control and coordinate other strategies. And then there's domain-specific strategies, which are specific to the person, the situation, and the task, and they solve specific issues, and they're more used on a short-term basis. Lastly is guided discovery, and it promotes active learning, and it allows the client to come up with their own answers to the problems, and they can fit their new discoveries in with existing knowledge that they have. So there's 4 different catchphrases that you can use with clients, and they pose questions to draw attention to the performance issue, and these catchphrases allow the client to focus on one thing at a time to keep them from becoming frustrated, asking them rather than telling them what they need to do and what the issue is, coaching them instead of just adjusting things so they can understand the reasoning behind why this needs to be adjusted. And even though they are doing it on their own and you're not supposed to be telling them specifically what they need to do, you can still make it obvious so that way they're not frustrated, but they can still feel like they're figuring it out themselves. So this really helps the client to discover problem-solving strategies, and again allows them to feel responsible over coming up with solutions, and which in turn puts the client at the center of the intervention and makes them really feel in charge. And this guided discovery is used in the plan and check steps, and it allows the therapist to really focus on what's important to the client. So how does co-op affect occupational performance? It's based on the idea that human occupational performance is learned, and this approach begins with the client's roles and how they affect their performance of different occupations and skills. And the co-op approach draws from both psychology and human movement science, and drawing from these 2 different studies shows that skills are learned, and thus the skills are based on cognition. So it also shows that performance is a result of the interaction between the person, the task, and the environment, and that a client's individual cognitive process is the most important in occupational performance when they're learning new skills and how to perform different tasks. Alright, so I'm just going to briefly talk about the study that I assigned. So there were 45 children aged 4 to 15 with either cerebral palsy or a brain injury, and they split them into 3 groups of 15 for this study, doing a splint-only group, a group that only used co-op, and then a group that used both splinting and co-op for upper limb interventions, and it took place over 2 weeks with 10 consecutive sessions for an hour apiece. And in order to measure the client's success throughout the study, they used COPM and GAS, and those measured the client's performance and the change in their goals. And then they also used the BBT, which is the box and block test, and found wrist range of motion. So the box and block test is a test where clients will grasp and release blocks when transferring them from one side of a box to another in 60 seconds, and the score can be anywhere from 0 to 150, and that's the number of blocks that they move from one side to the other in the 60 seconds. So at the end of the study, they found that all the groups improved on the COPM, but there was no statistically significant difference between the beginning and the end. However, there was a statistically significant difference in GAS in all three groups. And those who had co-op had better results than those without. Also, on the box and block test and wrist range of motion, there is a statistically significant difference between the splint only and the co-op only group, and having the co-op only group do better for both of these tests than the splint only group. However, doing co-op with or without splinting really didn't make a difference overall, and it was because the researchers believed that the groups did better with co-op because it is so task specific and goal oriented, and the clients were able to work more with the therapists to reach the goals that they set. There was one major limitation to the study, and it was that splints were not well tolerated by the participants. They were asked at the end of the study if they would wear splints again, and majority of them said they did not like wearing the splints and they would not want to wear them again. These are just my references, so thank you for watching.